Why are so many young people LGBTQ+? No, but really though, according to a Gallup poll released in 2022, a record 7.1% of adults in the US identify as LGBTQ+. But when broken down generationally, Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2003, as in the people who are mainly watching this because, hi, I do know how old you are, or how old you told YouTube you are. Maybe some of you are lying, who's to say? A huge 21% of you identify as LGBTQ+, compared to just 10.5% of millennials, 4.2% of Gen Xers, and 2.6% of baby boomers. Around 8% also declined to answer, so make of that what you will. The same holds true for the UK, where the 2021 census found that more than half of LGB+ people are aged between 16 and 34. Side note, don't worry if you're looking at that headline and going, oh, wait, hang on, is that transphobic? It's just a way of saying we're specifically talking about sexual orientation that has also unfortunately been co-opted to, when used in place of LGBT, i.e. the term we tend to use for the whole community in the UK, be trans-exclusionary by the very nature of that glaring omission of the T, but that isn't the case in this particular headline, so. Question, is that because young people are gayer than previous generations? No. Yeah. But also, are there by numbers more gay young people? Yes. Is that kind of muddy? Maybe. Keep watching, I'll explain. Are the old people lying? I mean, way to phrase that. Firstly, we can argue that not everyone might even reply truthfully to the questionnaire. I mean, who's more likely to reply truthfully? Someone who was born and grew up in a time when being homosexual was illegal and crossing gender barriers was deeply taboo, even if nowadays it isn't? Or someone who grew up when gay families were legal and saw trans characters on TV? I mean, you can't help but have that sharp drop-off in people in older age groups identifying as a minority sexual orientation kind of raise questions about entrenched homophobic attitudes, including internalized homophobia. With increased visibility of different types of LGBTQ+ identities and access to information through the internet, are younger adults just more comfortable identifying as LGBTQ+ to an interviewer in a telephone survey? Are they more likely to just publicly label themselves? Or are we more likely to do the soul searching and, you know, see what's inside our mushy selves? Do older gay people even know they're gay? For American Gen Zers, most of you have grown up amid the Supreme Court's recognition of same-sex marriage in the Obergefell versus Hodges decision in 2015. Fun fact, I actually met my wife the same year that same-sex marriage became legal in the UK, so it's nice that that was always an option. You can actually click the card here to see our love story. And there have been noticeable shifts in acceptance of LGBTQ+ identities to go along with this. But for that to happen, previous generations had to pave the way. Is the world gayer now? Yes! It's a rainbow! The world is one big rainbow now. Meh. More on that later. Okay, according to Laura Westengard, coordinator of the Gender and Sexuality Studies program at the New York City College of Technology, baby boomers and Gen Xers were at the front lines of the LGBTQ+ liberation movement during the mid to late 20th century and came out of a generation of repression, violence, and institutionalization. Those LGBTQ+ baby boomers lived through the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, an event catalyzed by a police raid and brutality that became a turning point in rights for LGBTQ+ people. It's important to remember just how hard our elders had it. So respect them, particularly because we don't have a lot of them. Previous generations sacrificed, protested, and were active, so we could benefit. That's opened up so many possibilities for us in terms of naming non-heteronormative ways of being. But sometimes there can feel like a bit of a generational divide, and particularly because we're a culture that doesn't tend to raise the next generation in our homes, which is quite different to other marginalised cultures. Tragically, most children of LGBTQ+ parents are just allies. Oh, unless we're talking about our gay bees, the friends just starting out on their queer journey who come to us for advice. We definitely do have a hand in raising them, and I have loved all of my gay bees equally, but my advice has definitely improved. Since I was a teenager, I deeply apologise to anyone who got a 3-hour-long mixtape from one of my gay bees. That is what playlists are for. Is the world gayer? Well, I mean, it's safer. It's just a place. where you can more easily explore and then express who you are than you could 50 years ago. Our family, our unity, and our fights continue, even though the proportion of LGBTQ+ adults probably will keep growing as more Gen Xers enter adulthood. That's going to seem pretty scary to the conservative parts of the older generations, who will then push back. So, yeah. Is it scary? Yes, it is, but talking helps, so let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. Because on this channel, we believe in taking care of your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Now, as an inclusive lesbian, I believe everyone, no matter your age, gender, sexuality, race, or disability status, should be entitled to therapy, and BetterHelp couldn't agree more. In fact, BetterHelp assess your needs and match you with a licensed therapist from the thousands they have available, so you're sure to find a good match, even if you're looking for a very specific type of therapist or someone who specializes in the particular area you're having trouble with right now. Do you want to exclusively speak to LGBTQ+ therapists or those with a deep intersectional understanding of how being queer impacts the rest of your life? Yeah, you can click that button. And don't worry if you don't find the perfect match at first, because with BetterHelp, it's like the best kind of dating app. You don't have to break up with them in person. You could just click a button to try someone new. One of my favorite things about BetterHelp is that it's accessible. If you have time constraints or because of a chronic illness, you can't easily find appointments with therapists available at times that suit you, or you just live in an area where there aren't lots of therapists, BetterHelp takes away the travel time, which is ideal for me. I'm not always feeling physically well enough to leave bed, but your BetterHelp therapist won't mind if you take the call from the comfort of your own bed. And can I just say, I have lost quite a lot of money in the past from appointments that I've had to cancel at the very last minute due to a migraine. Just smash, there it is, got you, bash. That was my head. Like 30 minutes before my appointment is meant to start. And everyone's cancellation policy is 12 hours, 24 hours. And I'm like, if I knew a migraine was going to hit me 24 hours in advance, do you not think my life would be just incredibly more planned? If you're interested in trying BetterHelp, then just head to the link in my description, betterhelp.com Jessica Kellgren-Fozard, for 10% off your first month. It's an internet thing. The biggest difference between Gen Z and all of the other generations has to be the shock of being the first generation to come of age online, right? I mean, I'm not a particularly old millennial, so the internet was a huge part of my teenage years, but it was rubbish. And wow, was it unfiltered. Content moderation, who is she? I have seen and read things that I did not understand, and occasionally I still have, oh my God, moments where I realised that was, my kids aren't getting technology until they can write me a 10-page essay about the benefits of not clicking on every link. But what I did have was access to a community network that didn't require physical proximity and LGBTQ+ content, even if it was just endless Buffy and Face fanfiction. We do well on the internet, right? The gays do well, because we can finally connect. We're very spread out, you know, seeing as we are everywhere. On every road, in every city. Are we actually on every road though? I mean, I guess if you bring Generation Alpha into this, we probably are. I mean, I'm intrigued to see these stats in 20 years' time. The internet lets us seek out information from the privacy of our own home, our own phones. No sneaking to the awkward back shelf of the library, and then, you know, we can just look at it and hide that tab and not think about it again if that answer isn't right for us. It also brings up new options that we didn't know existed, and we don't need to know exactly what it is you're looking for before you start your search. It's no longer, am I gay? But now, well, I think I'm not straight, but I'm sure my TikTok For You page will eventually show me a video that recontextualizes and encapsulates my entire romantic being in one 10-second clip. Second fun fact of the video, one constant across generations is that the majority of LGBTQ+ people identify as bisexual. In fact, more Gen Z and millennials respondents said they were bisexual than all other demographics of the community combined. So 11.5% of Gen Zers and 5.1% of millennials said they are attracted to people of more than one gender, whereas a respective 5.3% and 4% identified as gay, lesbian, or transgender. One quirk in the Gallup survey, though, is it does not identify how many people who are transgender also identified as being part of the community in another way. I mean, it's pretty likely that some trans survey respondents are also bisexual, gay, or lesbian. Will there be silly arguments that greater access to the internet and all its gayness is making young people gay? Sure, but silly arguments are made all the time, so You're not taking on a fake LGBTQ plus identity because it's cool online. You're just discovering part of yourself that you didn't know was already inside, thanks to better access to the tools of self-discovery and companionship. In just 20 years, we have gone from homosexuality is problematic, don't talk about it, to here are multiple children's books about how some children have 2 mums or 2 dads. It doesn't mean that life is golden and easy. It doesn't mean no one has to come out anymore. And it certainly doesn't mean that everything is the same for everyone all around the world. Could it be that we're missing people? Homophobia isn't the only answer to where are all the middle-aged queer people. Also kind of is. Because at one point in time there was a pandemic that took more lives than it should have. Because the medical response, and even the basic compassionate response, was slowed down by homophobia. And it was a crisis for our community. Growing up, there were 2 adults whose non-straightness made me feel better about my own. My aunt and my godfather. Only I didn't actually get to grow up with my godfather. He died when I was still a baby, and instead I grew up knowing that it was especially horrific because he died before my parents' eyes and they couldn't tell anyone about it. It just wasn't spoken about in the early 1990s. Sadly, the AIDS epidemic took many, almost an entire generation of gay men. This photo shows the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus in 1993, 12 years into the epidemic. The 7 men in white are the only surviving original members. The men in black represent those who had died from AIDS. The virus was first clearly identified in San Francisco in the early 1980s, and according to the Foundation for AIDS Research, the virus had killed more than 234,000 people in the US by the end of 1993. So yes, perhaps it isn't so surprising that the number of boomers and Gen Xers who reply as being LGBTQ+ on the survey is smaller. When HIV and AIDS first emerged, gay male baby boomers, those who were born in 1946 to 1964, were aged 34 to 16. For them, the high number of deaths at the epidemic's peak, 1987 to 1996, shaped their personal, social, psychological, and community lives. During the epidemic, throughout their life course, and into later years, 10% of men aged 25 to 44 who identified as gay had died by 1995, and others would follow. But this was unfolding in a political climate that was intensely hostile to gay men and women, with conservative forces condemning people living with HIV/AIDS as immoral. And President Reagan's administration not only notoriously avoiding public mention of AIDS until 1985, but outright laughing when members of the press brought it up, despite the mounting death toll, with disgusting levels of homophobia, meaning the people in charge just sat on their hands. It was left to the community itself to organise, forming direct action and medical research groups like ACT UP, agitating for better responses from the scientific community, launching their own public information campaigns, and establishing community-based systems of care for people with HIV and AIDS. AIDS killed 324,029 men and women in the USA between those peak years, and the death rate began to only drop off with the introduction of effective antiretroviral medications in 1986. According to the World Health Organization, since the beginning of the epidemic, around 84 million people have been infected with the HIV virus, and about 40 million people have died. Currently, in the region of 38 million people live with HIV, and 1.5 million new infections occurred in 2021. The world doesn't seem that gay to me now, though. Fair point, yeah. I mean, it's not like a large number of younger people identifying as LGBTQ+ magically makes the world, or even this generation, free from oppression and the challenges related to gender and sexuality. That would be wildly out there. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but it's largely old and rather conservative people who are running the world, yeah. But at least we get to be the old people who run everything one day. I'm kind of intrigued as to what my children are going to do that surprises me, or seems baffling. I mean, my occupation is literally YouTuber. And yes, that is acceptable to the tax man. I was surprised too. What is Rupert going to dream of doing that makes me say, not sure about that. It's a bit out there. Bookbinder? Oh, no, Lord, you have really ruined bookbinding for me. Okay, world's strongest man. I mean, he currently wants to spend his time doing ballet, baking, or quietly playing with his doll's house. So if he does turn to like steroids, massive tattooed biceps, and yelling incoherently or throwing rocks around, at least I get to break out this face. I did not see this coming. This is fun. But I also know he's in the particularly cushy position of having parents who do not have life goal expectations for him, and that Gen Alpha have mainly millennials for parents, and they're going to be stepping into Gen Z's world-changing footsteps. So, I wish I was Gen Alpha. Millennials just get hated by newspapers for our avocado toast, which is, it's just mean. Kind of point, meandering though it is that although headlines, when research like this comes out, makes it seem like the world is just rainbows and sparkles for those of us who are queer, young LGBTQ+ people today still do face anti-trans bills around the world, as well as legislation targeting even conversations around sexuality and gender identity in schools in the US. Meanwhile, books with LGBTQ+ characters have been disproportionately targeted in a wave of book banning. Experts say that in the US, the overturning of Roe v. Wade could open the door to reconsideration and reversal of other established rights, including marriage equality. Oh, yeah, and this is very much not the whole world. But still, the future's bright. The future's rainbow. Civic engagement is deeply important. Vote in every election you can and get involved before polling day too. Get queer people and open allies who support LGBTQ+ issues into positions of power, and then bother them if they don't live up to their promises. I'm not here for the, oh, I don't vote, they're all the same. Oh, I'm not interested in politics. Well, I mean, that's nice, but you will be when you're losing your rights and freedoms. Even being part of your own local LGBTQ+ community and keeping it alive intergenerationally is important. Learn the stories of your elders and pass them down. Stonewall, the AIDS crisis, the legalization of gay marriage. There will always be battles, and there always have been, but now at least we don't have to be ashamed of who we are. And now we know how powerful we can be when we stand together. To my mind, people fall into two categories. It was hard for me, so it should be hard for you, or it was hard for me, so I want to make it easier for you. Now, we can argue all day about the rights and wrongs of putting your own moral code onto other people, but I can't help but feel the second group is the one who can bring a more positive benefit to society. Hopefully a society where everyone eventually all feels truly welcome. So there we go, that's my take on why the world seems a little bit gayer now. What would you like to add? Let me know in the comments below. Do try and keep it civil, and remember to respond with kindness. I do deeply enjoy your very, very good wisecracks to homophobic comments that get left on my videos. I should probably do a video where I just purely read out the best responses to homophobia that get on my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, but you do watch my videos and occasionally leave your own wisecracking responses to homophobia, then please do remember to subscribe. Just click the button down below. And of course, thank you again to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Remember to click the link in the description, betterhelp.com/Jessica Kellgren-Fozard. That's at BetterHelp, as in HELP, and then my name. I know, now you have to learn to spell my name. It's Jessica, like the regular Jessica, Jessica. Oh yeah, I'm super dyslexic and sometimes I struggle with my own name. Jessica's the one that trips me. And then Kellgren, Kellgren. It's Swedish and I pronounce it incorrectly. And I know I do, but it's the only way I can make people spell it properly when I say it. So you gotta do what you must. And Fozard, F-O-Z-A-R-D, which people definitely don't pronounce correctly ever. So, good names. They're hard. So click that though, it's in the description. You don't even really need to spell it. It's in the description as a link. There we go. And you'll get 10% off your first month. That's it for now, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye bye.